we'll quickly finish paper 2, right? We already have handouts. Yes? So, quick recap and quick revision of paper 2. Now, when you look at paper 2, one section which we always have question is with respect to second chapter. That is second chapter in the context of demography, right? Either it is the racial classification in India, or definitely a question on linguistic diversity any given day. So in that context, always remember, so you see, whenever you are writing this chapter, ensure that you are using theories that you learn in 11th chapter. That I keep telling, that whatever demographic theories that you use in 11th chapter, you please state them in 2nd chapter. Don't randomly write a general answer there, right? Always I would say, use those here, 1. The second thing that you will have to remember whenever you are writing this 2nd chapter is, ensure that you are emphasizing on diversity of India. Because when they ask you demographic characteristic features, most of us, or on demographics, most of us will think that we are only supposed to write something related to population. But the characteristic feature of Indian population is what?
Diverse.
Talk about the diversity, the second element. And whenever we are discussing about the diversity here, do not ever forget to write the tribal diversity. Always ensure that you are writing about the tribal diversity in this 2nd chapter. So that means whenever they are talking about the racial aspects or whenever they are talking about the population, definitely talk about the tribal characteristic features there, right? So that is one small addition that you will have to do. When you look at 3rd chapter, that is 3.1 especially, you have to understand that we have Varnashrama Dharma. And we have Purusharthas. When you look at Varnashrama Dharma, you see Brahmacharya, Gruhastu, Vanaprastha and Sannyasa. Each of these individuals, they have their own Rina. What is Rina? Rina is nothing but the social obligation that is seen to be existing. Rina is nothing but the social obligation that is seen to be existing with respect to that individual. And whenever we are talking about Varnashrama Dharma, all of them will have that, they will have to abide by what? Purusharthas.
Yeah.
And in that, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And specifically when you see this Artha and Kama, if they are driven by the spirit of Dharma, then you reach Moksha. And here when we talk about the Kama, that fundamentally means desires. And Artha fundamentally means the wealth acquisition. And most of the times we see that this wealth acquisition is responsibility of whom? Gruhastu. And rest of the activities of Kama or the desires is with respect to the Brahmacharya and Sannyasa. And what is seen to be happening is, when both of these are not seen to be existing and when they are in the phase of transition, that is where we see Vanaprastha. What is Vanaprastha? Vanaprastha is a stage where all the responsibilities are left behind. How are they leaving their responsibilities? They are leaving their responsibilities by fulfilling their responsibilities. In general, it is observed when the marriage of the eldest son is performed, then the person is eligible to get into Vanaprastha. That is one basic understanding that you always have to remember. And here what is observed, there is also concept of Punarjanma or rebirth. The simple understanding is, when you don't follow the path of Dharma for Artha and Kama, And when you don't meet the social obligation of Rina, automatically you will have rebirth. That means the very simple formula here is the ultimate aspect of any individual is what? Moksha. And that moksha is through the path of dharma, and that moksha is through the path of fulfilling the social obligation or rina. And here you see it is brahmacharya, gruhastu, vanaprastha and sannyasa. And whereas here you see it is with respect to artha and kama. And that is where you attain moksha. If this is not followed and if some other path is followed, and if this is not met but some other aspect is met, automatically it will result in what? It will result in a rebirth. That is the relation that you will always have to remember. And with the commercialization of the society today, what is observed is the role of gruhastu is seen to be increasing. And the significance of sannyasa is seen to be reducing. With the aspects of commercialization, it is spoken by Pandarinath. Pandarinath talks about that the aspects of gruhastu is increasing and the aspects of sannyasa reduces. So that is one simple understanding that you need to have with respect to 3.1. It is always use everything in the question. And we always have a 10 marker in this particular question. Next, when you look at 3.2, that is the aspects of caste system. I keep telling you that whenever we see caste studies will have majorly three perspectives. One perspective is the book view of caste. Other perspective is the field view of caste. The other perspective is the contemporary view of caste. When you look at the book view of the caste, you see that one perspective is the G.S. Gure's understanding of caste, where he talks about the segmentation which is existing because of caste, where he talks about hierarchy because of this caste. And you also see the aspects of Louis Dumont, who talks about the caste system is based on purity and pollution. Caste system is based on the concept of purity and pollution. That is what is seen to be existing. But whereas when you look at the field view understanding of caste, when you look at the field view understanding of caste is given by M.N. Srinivas. But one more aspect that you need to remember about book view of the caste is the caste system is a rigid system. And what is seen to be happening is the ritual purity determines the social position or the social status. But whereas in the context of field view, what is seen to be happening, the caste system is seen to be more flexible, but you also see an element of mobility existing in caste system. And you also observe that ritual purity is no more an indication of social status of an individual. Because that is where you see talking about what? Sanskritization. M.N. Srinivas talking about Sanskritization, M.N. Srinivas talking about the factors of westernization. When you look at the contemporary view here, when you see the contemporary view of caste, it's very simple that in the context of contemporary view, somebody has accepted the contemporary view of the caste. And when you look at this acceptance, we see it manifesting in the context of untouchability. Untouchability, where you see Christopher Jefferlot and Ganesham Shah talking about these aspects of untouchability. And what are they saying? Untouchability is what? Where the pure or so-called pure section of the society do not engage in interaction with the polluted section of the society. And we see that being manifested in multiple aspects. Another kind of acceptance that we see in the context of contemporary view is where caste is seen to be having a discrete identity. Where caste is seen to be having a discrete identity. Now, when you look at this caste having a discrete identity with respect to acceptance, discrete identity means what? The individual's perception of caste. The individual's perception of caste. And we also see the marginal sections or the lower caste perceive there is caste even lower to them. That means if I am saying this is the society, if this is the upper caste and if this is the lower caste, upper caste is perceiving this caste to be lower caste. But this lower caste perceives there is even lower caste to them. That means what is observed is everybody is having their own understanding of caste, their own perception of caste, their own construct of caste. And that is where we see how is individual perceiving about caste system is seen to be existing. Other. Then we also see certain things are seen to be changing in caste system. One aspect that is seen to be changing in caste system is the understanding of dominant caste. When you look at once upon a time, the understanding of dominant caste was what? That somebody who had more numerical strength, the political strength and the economic strength determined the dominant caste. But today, because of certain constitutional measures, what do we see? An individual who has employment, an individual who has or who is part of the modern democratic institutions are perceived to be what? Dominant caste. And what is seen to be happening, because of these changes in the caste system, the caste conflicts are seen to be transitioning. Once upon a time, it used to be such that the upper caste was fighting with the lower caste. And slowly what started happening with the emergence of the dominant caste as a phenomenon, we see upper caste is fighting with dominant caste. But over a period of time with the reservation, over a period of time with the emergence of modern democratic institutions, what started happening is the dominant caste is fighting with the lower caste. The dominant caste is fighting with the lower caste. That is where we see the transition of caste conflicts happening because of the contemporary view of the caste system. That is what is seen. Then apart from that, we also see the aspects of Sanskritization is also changing with respect to caste system. When we look at these aspects of Sanskritization which is changing with respect to caste system, when you talk about Sanskritization, once upon a time when M.N. Srinivas was studying about Sanskritization in Coorgs, what was observed? That if this is Brahmins, this is Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras, the lower sections were trying to emulate the practices of the upper section. That is Sanskritization. Or the lower sections of the society were trying to emulate the practices of the dominant caste. That is another understanding of Sanskritization. But over a period of time, what started happening is, we see there is a phenomena called as de-Sanskritization. When we look at de-Sanskritization, one understanding is the upper caste or the dominant caste is trying to emulate the practices of the lower caste. The upper caste is trying to emulate the practices of lower caste, and we would have studied about patidars. Patidars, we are seeing one particular statement that in order to move forward, they are marrying backwards. That's one. Another dynamic that we see is the aspects of tribalization. Tribalization means what? Certain caste individuals are trying to emulate the practices of tribes. Certain caste individuals trying to emulate the practices of tribes. That is another understanding with respect to tribalization. So one aspect is the Sanskritization and de-Sanskritization, then tribalization. Then apart from that, you also see there is another very important understanding of caste system which is seen to be existing. Now, one aspect that we have seen is acceptance, untouchability here. But there is another important dimension which is seen to be emerging in the near future that we see is raising something called as Dalit consciousness. Rise of Dalit consciousness and concepts like Dalit capitalism are seen to be emerging. Now, when you look at this rise of Dalit consciousness and Dalit capitalism, that is where we see the aspects of Dalit assertion. That is where we see the aspects of Dalit assertion, where the lower sections of the society are asserting their identity. When the lower sections of the society are asserting their identity, it is very simple here that assertion could be through education, that assertion could be through technology, that assertion could be through reservation, that assertion could be through employment, that assertion could be through the constitutional backing which is happening. Or that assertion could also happen because of mobilization. So all of these kinds of assertions are seen to be happening with respect to Dalits. So that is another important dimension that you have to remember with respect to the change in the contemporary view of caste. Then another change that you see is demand for reservations. When you look at this demand for reservation, what is observed is in the context of the society, we see that this is forward community and this is backward community. And when you observe this, it is seen that there are some people backward in the forward community. And there are some people who are forward in the backward community. And what is observed? That is what we see. Backward forwards and forward backwards. We see a concept of backward forwards and forward backwards, where some concept or some backward population existing in forward communities and some forward communities existing in backward communities. What is happening is this particular community is trying to demand for reservation in comparison with the forwards of the backward community. Because it was observed and it was perceived that this backward community or this forwards of the backward community were dominating the backwards of the forward community. That is where we see the demand for reservation by Kapus. That is where we see the demand for reservation by Marathas. That is where we see the demand for reservation by Jats. That is where we see the reservation demand by Patidars. All of this reservation demand is happening on the basis of backward forwards and forward backwards. So that is another important dimension that you need to understand with respect to caste. So if you are able to understand these contemporary perspectives of caste, sufficient. Dominant caste changing, Sanskritization changing, untouchability emerging, and discrete identities emerging. And apart from that, you also see demand for reservation and Dalit consciousness. 6 different dimensions, sufficient. But one small thing that you also have to understand at this point of time is that you see there is an intersectionality that is existing between gender and caste. What do you see here? When you look at this intersectionality of gender and caste, you see women having these, or most of the women being positioned there. Now when we look at women being positioned there, what is happening? The upper caste or the forward communities are seen to be that as they move up, it is also indicating increased restrictions on women. Increased restrictions on women. And they were also perceiving that with an increased restriction on women, they were moving up. That is another dimension which is observed, where they cannot come out, where they cannot move, where they will have to wear that gungat. All these are what? The practices of forward community, and the backward community were thinking by increasing the restriction on women, they were moving what? They were moving forward or they were moving upward. That means women were also an agent of what? Women were also an agent of mobilization. That means we see upper caste women having more restrictions than lower caste women. Why? Lower caste women are supposed to go out and work. They have lower class which is existing. And you also have to understand that there is an intersectionality that is seen to be existing between the caste and the class. Sometimes the forward communities or the forward caste were having upper class. The backward caste were having the lower class. So what is observed in the contemporary perspectives is the convergence and the intersectionality of caste and class is increasing. And the intersectionality of gender and caste is increasing. That is another contemporary perspective that you need to understand here. So all these are contemporary perspectives of caste.
What is more by restrictions?
Perutayi.
Yeah, what is more by the end?
No. Upper caste, they are already existing. They are already moved up. Where will they go?
No.
You please understand that. This is upper caste.
The caste already have restrictions.
That's what I'm telling. Upper caste have all restrictions. I'm not telling about their moving. Where will they move? Antakanna paiki pothe tal tagultadi. Yes or no? That is what is seen there. So it is fundamentally observed. Apart from that, you see, there is another section which is present in 3.3, that is with respect to what? Nature, man, spirit complex and sacred complex. Yesterday we already discussed about sacred complex. In nature, man, spirit complex, what do you see? Nature, man, spirit, all these are related to each other. And this becomes in its totality the nature, man, spirit complex. And you have to understand, it is with respect to what? LP Vidyarthi. And not only that, you also need to understand here along with LP Vidyarthi in the context of nature, man, spirit complex, you also have to use Julian H. Stewart. Julian H. Stewart, because it is what? Culture ecology approach. Culture ecology approach, Julian H. Stewart has to be used with respect to this. You will also have to use Ruth Benedict in the context of the Goutham or the spirits. With respect to the Goutham or the spirits, you will also have to use Ruth Benedict. Now, all these people are supposed to be appearing in nature, man, spirit complex. And the application of nature, man, spirit complex, you can also use the cultural materialism by whom? Marvin Harris. See, all of these interlinkages can definitely flow in when you are writing with respect to nature, man, spirit complex. Right? Then apart from that, you should also understand the impact of religions on Indian society. Now, when you look at impact of religions on Indian society, I would always tell you whenever it is talking about XYZ religion on Indian society, one aspect that I told you to do is what? Use your simple pestle approach. Right? Or I just asked you to tell what is the social impact, economic impact, political impact, that. Along with that, you also please specify what is its impact on the tribal society within this particular answer. Don't miss this dimension. Don't miss this dimension that when you are writing Indian society specifically, also imbibe the impact of tribal societies there. And that is extremely important. Why? Because tribal society is part of Indian society any given time. So that has to be put in and that has to be written. Now, whenever you are talking about impact of Hinduism, whenever you are talking about impact of Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity, Islam, all of this is supposed to be brought in. Right? Don't write positive impact, negative impact. If the person is belonging to that religion and if he sees that there is negative impact, then you will have negative impact on your marks. Obviously, my dear, religion is a very sensitive issue. You can't talk about and fiddle around there. Who knows what is the probability? Right? And if your planetary position is very wrong, even if you talk about negative aspects of Jainism, it could be such that a person belonging to that is evaluating your paper, which is of 0.1%, which is part of your population. Ho sakta hai. So you never know, don't fiddle around with that. I would always tell you, just focus on the staple approach and talk about the tribal societies. And always use these words like acculturation, enculturation, transculturation, assimilation. You please use these words. Cultural appropriation, cultural transfusion, cultural interactions. societal stability, societal structures. Use all of these words somewhere or the other. You throw them here and there. Right? Use these words at any cost. And definitely bring in some aspects of 5th chapter. In 5th chapter, what did I tell you? I told you about use the aspects of secularization of religion by William Bryson. Use this person's name. Secularization of religion by William Bryson. So in that context, with respect to this 5th chapter, you link it there. Because what's happening today, the impact of religion on Indian society could be declining because of secularization of religion. Ho sakta hai. So bring in this dimension. Right? Bring in this dimension whenever you're writing impact of religion. Okay. Next. When you look at, say for suppose if you're writing something on the thinker. For suppose there is a question on G.S. Gure. Or there's a question on N.K. Bose. There's a question on any thinker, we have one question always. A.C. Roy, whatever. I would say that introduction should always be what is his or her core contribution. One core contribution. One core contribution. And then talk about what is their contribution to caste studies. What is their contribution to village studies? What is their contribution to tribal studies? What is their contribution to archaeological studies? If there are any studies or any contribution to medical anthropology also, please indicate. This is how you can happily structure your answer. And is there any contribution to anthropological fieldwork that is done by this individual? So definitely bring in that particular perspective whenever you are writing this particular answer. So that is another very, very important dimension that has to be remembered. Now once you remember that particular dimension, what is your conclusion? Always conclusion is what? They have expanded the scope of branch of anthropology. Where? In India. They have expanded the scope of anthropology as a field of study in India. Right? Their research is a watershed moment in expanding the understanding of that particular phenomena. That is socio-cultural or archaeological or linguistic or whatever. Are you understanding? This is one common template that you can definitely keep it whenever you are writing the 4th chapter. Then when you look at village studies. Now, whenever you talk about village studies, always remember village has a certain characteristic feature. 1, it is agrarian society. 2, it is characterized with joint family. 3, it is mostly traditional in nature. 4, it has caste system which is prevalent. 5, it has Jajmani system which is very noticeable. And 6, the factors of religion is also present. Now all these aspects are what? Characteristic features of village. Now if they say village system is changing, the simple observation is how is this changing, how is this changing, how is this changing, how is this changing, how is this changing and how is this changing. The simple understanding is that. Right? The simple understanding is that with respect to these dimensions. Right? So you can talk about how are these aspects changing. That is one important dimension that has to be remembered. Yes? Ashok Nagar Law. Yes? Then apart from that, what you have to understand with respect to this village system is one perspective that we have seen is that there is a nationalist perspective, there is a colonial perspective, and there is a contemporary perspective. When you look at this nationalist perspective, When we look at this nationalist perspective or colonial perspective categorically said that most of the Indian villages are what they are?
Still are.
Self-sufficient systems. Most of the colonial aspects said what they are, the self-sufficient systems. In fact, you can club both of them. Colonial and nationalist have a similar perspective. They are self-sufficient systems, and more than anything, they could represent the Indian social system. They could represent the Indian social system. So that is another important dimension that has to be remembered with respect to this nation and colonial. So one aspect is it is self-sufficient. Self-sufficient means what? It is independent entity. There is no interdependence which is existing. But some people say that it is interdependent. Some people say that it is interdependent. And some people say that it is not a representation of Indian social system. It is not a representation of Indian social system. So one aspect that you have to remember here is what it is interdependent system. The other aspect is what it is not a representative of Indian social system. So that is another very, very important dimension or debate that you have to understand. Now here, what is seen to be happening with respect to the contemporary perspective of villages is what we have all of these factors changing. And 5.3 talks about what? 5.3 talks about what are the factors of change. Right? What are the factors of change is what is seen by 5.3. Now when you look at this, what are these factors of change? In your 5.3, it talks about the indigenous factors and exogenous factors. One is the indigenous factors, the other one is exogenous factors. Now when we talk about this indigenous factors and exogenous factors, very simple. That indigenous factors like what? Factors like Sanskritization. Factors like Sanskritization. Apart from this factors like Sanskritization, you also have to understand that it is with respect to the aspects of how is this Jajmani system changing? The indigenous factors, how is this Jajmani system changing? Then when we look at exogenous systems to a larger extent, how is westernization playing out? How is globalization playing out? How is modernization playing out? How is westernization playing out? How is globalization playing out? How is modernization playing out? And here what are we seeing? We are seeing that because of all of this, the 6 characteristic features that we discussed previously were what? They are changing. They are changing. And not only that, you please add one more internal factor, my dear. That one more internal factor that you can talk about is with the aspects of democratization. With the aspects of democratization. With the aspects of democratization also, what is happening? You see the internal systems are changing. For example, you see Panchayat Raj system. You see Panchayat Raj system that is bringing in some change. So that is one thing which you will have to remember with respect to the internal factors and external factors. If you want to talk about, you can even talk about internal factors to be digitization or the role of digital technologies in changing the village system. The role of digital technology in changing the village system. So the factors which are talking about is all of this. Are you understand? You can talk about one line here. One more small thing that you have to understand, the other day already we were discussing, that we always see that traditions and modernization are never absolute, but rather we have coexistence. We have rather coexistence with respect to what? Some aspect of traditions are modernized. And some aspects of modern elements have traditional influence. And that is where we see aspects of universalization, aspects of parochialization, aspects of universalization, aspects of parochialization, aspects of interplay of little traditions and great traditions. Interplay of little traditions and great traditions. That is another important dimension that you will have to remember with respect to these traditions and modernity. I was giving you the other day some examples of these traditions and modernity. Was what? Online darshan or caste associations. That means what? You see the influence of the traditional elements on the modern and modern elements on the tradition. And that is what is seen to be existing here. Then apart from that, you also have to understand that whenever we are talking about tribe caste continuum, whenever you are talking about the tribe caste continuum, you please understand there is no perfect tribe, there is no perfect caste, but we see the convergence of both the tribe and caste elements. For example, Oriya caste and Kond tribe. Oriya caste and Kond tribe. And you see, the studies were largely Indianized by whom? Surjit Sinha. The studies were largely Indianized by whom? Surjit Sinha. Now, whenever we are talking about this dimension of tribe and caste, some concepts that we observe is the dimensions of pseudo-tribalism. And when you look at these aspects of pseudo-tribalism, what do you see? That when the non-tribe, pseudo-tribalism is what? Non-tribe is trying to claim the status of tribe. When a non-tribe is trying to claim the status of the tribe, or when a non-tribe is trying to turn into or practice the tribal systems, that is pseudo-tribalism. The pseudo-tribalism could be with the aspects of tribalization. The pseudo-tribalism could be with the aspects of de-Sanskritization. The pseudo-tribalism could be with the aspects of reservation. The pseudo-tribalism could be with the aspects of de-peasantization. It could be with the aspects of tribalization, it could be aspects of de-Sanskritization, it could be aspects of reservation, or it could be aspects of de-peasantization. Now, all of this could categorically turn into what? All of this could categorically turn into pseudo-tribalism. That is another very, very important dimension when you talk about the aspects of tribe, caste, continuum. Then apart from that, you also need to understand that we have a similar polar structure which is existing. That is with respect to the aspects of folk-urban continuum. And when you look at these aspects of folk-urban continuum, you see folk societies are those societies which are rural. Folk societies are those societies which are illiterate. Folk societies are those societies which have little tradition. And folk societies are those societies which have certain primitive practices. Whereas when you look at urban societies are those societies which are advanced. Urban societies are those societies which are literate. Urban societies are those societies which have written records. Urban societies are those societies which follow the great traditions. This is another very, very important dimension that you'll have to remember whenever you're talking. And the similar practices I can write whenever they ask me little tradition and great tradition. Whenever they ask me little tradition and great tradition. So that is another important dimension that you will have to remember with respect to folk-urban continuum. And what is it saying? It is saying that there is no perfect folk, there is no perfect urban. There is no perfect folk, there is no perfect urban. So that dimension has to be brought in whenever you are talking about this. So always we are seeing different aspects, traditions and modernization. little tradition and great tradition, tribe, caste, folk, urban, purity, pollution. All of these are part of the societal structure which are seen to be existing here. Right? Now, another important dimension that we need to understand here is when we look at Jajmani system. When we see Jajmani system, previously we were discussing what, my dear? Previously we were discussing that when you look at the village system, we were seeing that it is what Jajmani system is. It is more of a characteristic feature of the village society that is existing. Today when we look at this Jajmani system, what is seen to be happening? Jajmani system, when you look at the characteristic feature, there is a Jajman, and what is happening? We have the Kamins who are supplying the Jajman with the required services. And here what is observed, most of the times the Jajman happens to be a person belonging to the dominant caste. A person belonging to the dominant caste is Jajman. Now apart from this, you also have to understand, when you look at Jajmani system, most of the people perceived it to be reciprocal in nature. But some people perceived it to be exploitative in nature. Some people perceived it to be reciprocal, some people perceived it to be exploitative. Where in the reciprocal system, what was seen to be happening was, it was meeting the needs of the Kamins as well as it was meeting the needs of Jajmans. And it was said that it was a system which was showing reciprocity. It was a system which was based on the aspects of understanding. It was a system which was based on the aspects of mutual respect. All these were perceived. But whereas when you look at the exploitative systems, what is happening? It is the Jajman is exploiting the Kamin. The Jajman is not paying the Kamin. And you see that Kamin is restricted with respect to the occupational diversity the individual can go for. Because Jajmani system is categorically not allowing the Kamin to diversify the occupational aspects. So it is restricting and it is holding the individual there. Now here what is observed? You see that M.N. Srinivas observes a different perspective of exploitation. He says it is not the Jajman who is exploiting, but the Kamin is exploiting the Jajman. Kamin is exploiting the Jajman. That is what is perceived by M.N. Srinivas. Right? That means the exploitative one aspect is Jajman exploiting Kamin, but Kamin is also exploiting Jajman, is what is said by M.N. Srinivas. Now one very, very important dimension here is, you see there is a person by name Commander. Now this commander as an individual says that because of the growing economic systems, because of the growing commercialization, because of the growing economic systems and because of the growing commercialization, what is seen to be happening is, you see that Jajmani system is seen to be reducing in relevance. Jajmani system is seen to be reducing in relevance. Why? Because we see the economic opportunities have increased. Why? Because we see the technology and the digitization or digitalization of economy has increased.
Well,
Right? And more than anything, what is observed? Today you see the relevance of dominant caste has reduced. The relevance of dominant caste has reduced. Are you understanding? And you also see the Jajman need not depend upon Kamin because you have diversified channels of service delivery. Diversified channels of service delivery. So that is another important dimension which has to be written with respect to Jajmani system. Right? So that is one simple understanding with respect to Jajmani system. Then One dimension is they ask you what is the impact of globalization on Indian villages. Now always remember, whenever they are asking impact of X on some Y,
Yeah.
that means globalization, industrialization, urbanization, feminism, any of this, the first part of your answer should have the definition and the characteristics of this. Don't forget to write the characteristic features. Always write 3-4 characteristic features of this particular phenomenon. Because examiner should know that you know the characteristic features, then only you will be able to understand what is the impact. Very relevant. So write the characteristic features and then you talk about it. And whenever I see this word left and right, use Arjuna Padurai. And left and right use about 5 scapes. You remember fit me?
So,
Financial scape, idioscape, technoscape, mediascape, ethnoscape. Don't write your own scape. Fit me. Right? And straight away these are the characteristic features of globalization. And what is the mapping that I told you? Globalization impacting agrarian structure. Positive, negative. Globalization impacting joint family. Positive, negative. Globalization impacting the traditions. Positive, negative. Globalization impacting the Jajmani system. Positive, negative. Globalization impacting the religion there. Positive, negative. And globalization impacting the caste system. Positive, negative. Because all these are the 6 characteristic features of what? Village.
so tribes, right?
Don't bring in tribes here. They are very specific with villages. They are very specific with villages. If you want last May, you include that the globalization has also impacted the tribal population in both the positive and the negative aspects, as studied by Brain M. Fagan in The Clash of Cultures. I dictated, my dear. Massacre, ethnocide. Brain M. Fagan's understanding of clash of cultures there. That is what I dictated, right? Now here, definite things that you can include with Jajmani system is commander's understanding. Right? Religion is what? Secularization of religion. Caste is what? I already told you, contemporary perspectives of caste. Discrete identity. First half an hour you please take recording. You missed around 35 minutes of the class, right? Immediately take recording. I'll tell them, immediately process it. Online people, those who missed the initial 35 minutes, please, you take the recording. I'll ask them to give you. Then, agrarian system also, you have the system changing. Now in agrarian system, there is one person called as Rudolf and Rudolf, where he talks about a concept called as the bullock cart capitalist. Rudolf and Rudolf talks about a concept called as bullock cart capitalist. That means what? With the advent of globalization, slowly what do you observe? With the advent of globalization, you have the capitalist tendencies entering the agrarian structure. The capitalist tendency is entering the agrarian relation, and that is what is observed with respect to bullock cart capitalists. Now in the context of joint family, you can simply say disintegration of joint family. You remember, I gave you one studies of I.P. Desai for urbanization, where I told you disintegration and decreasing number of joint families that were studied. Use that here. Don't mention Bengaluru. Bengaluru is not village. But you can simply say, according to the observations of I.P. Desai, it was seen that there was a decline in the number of joint families in Indian society. Avalda. That you can use it there. In traditions, what did I tell you? Modernization of traditions. Modernization of traditions. I told you, traditions and modernity coexist. Online darshan, caste associations, all of those. So this is what is the aspects with respect to village studies. Right? So one aspect is what? One aspect is in the context of village studies.
Essence was security education, modern education, he claims 2018 against marriage. Something like
You can. You can. Tradition and modernization, you can. But always remember, whenever you're talking about the debate of tradition and modern, you have a simple structure, my dear. Because now when we are discussing it is fine, but when we are writing it becomes a problem. Whenever we are having this tradition and modern, write one line about tradition. Write one line on modernization. And write the characteristic features of tradition, write the characteristic features of modernization. And then straight away get into how traditions are influencing the modern elements. How modern elements are influencing the traditions. Easy. And then for each of these give example. For each of these give example. And then talk about the conclusion. What is the conclusion? Coexist. And here I see what is the dynamic that is happening with respect to little tradition and great tradition. Little tradition becoming great tradition becoming little tradition. And all this is happening because of the modern channels. If there was no social media, could I ever imagine little tradition becoming such great? No. Yes, so that means you see that these are traditional aspects, but what is the bridge that is making it, or what is the bridge that is making that changes is modernization. You bring in the structural approach, you can happily manage this 15 marker. All that is going to depend in this 15 marker is how are you bringing these aspects, right? Next. Now another important aspect of this particular,
I think there's a debate of redirecting and
that's there. People talk about Marwadi families, people talk about Agarwals, right? That is happening. But that could be a,
political change, not people so much about it.
that is conclusion. But my fundamental understanding here is that should never be the conclusion when I'm writing village systems. Why? Because I mostly see people disintegrating with respect to village systems. Now when I'm talking about family chapter as it is, there this stands relevant, and there I will have a lot of scope to discuss on this. Where the aspects of rejoining, where the aspects of Alan D. Ross studying these dimensions of joint family, those are there. But not in village system. Village system में इतना scope नहीं मिलेगा. ठीक है? Now, very important concept is the concept of ethnicity. Always we have questions on ethnicity. When you look at these dimensions of ethnicity, what is the simple understanding is any social group. I would also call that as ethnic group. Will have ethnic identity. Will have ethnic identity. Yes. And what is observed is based on this ethnic identity, they have that we feeling. And that we feeling is manifested in the form of ethnicity. That we feeling is manifested in the form of ethnicity. Right? So that is one dimension that you have to understand. And when I see that this ethnicity is not in sync with the ethnicity of the other, when I see that the ethnicity of one is not in sync with the ethnicity of the other, that is what is turning into what? That is what is turning into ethnic conflicts. And here, you see there are different approaches to ethnicity. When you look at these different approaches to ethnicity, one aspect that you see is with respect to the primordial approach. Primordial approach by Geets. When you look at this primordial approach by Geets with respect to ethnicity, the concept of ethnicity is seen to be existing by itself. The concept of ethnicity is seen to be existing by itself. That means you are associated with that particular community, so you have we feeling. That means there is no reinforcing force there. It is a primordial aspect, it is a primary aspect. But when I see the instrumental aspect by Frederick Barth, When you see the instrumental aspect with respect to Frederick Barth, what do you observe with respect to this instrumental aspect is ethnicity is being used as an instrument to reinforce, or it is being used as a means to reinforce. Ethnicity is being used as a means to reinforce, or it is being used as an instrument to reinforce the feeling. That is Frederick Barth. And what is seen to be happening here, sometimes the ethnic conflicts could be because of the primordial understanding. Sometimes the ethnic conflicts could be because of instrumental understanding. And most of the times whenever we are perceiving ethnic conflicts, it is mostly what it is seen as an instrumental aspect, where that ethnicity is used as an instrument to reinforce their identity, instrument to counter the other's identity, and that is all resulting in what? That is all resulting in conflicts.
So this sounds like instrument
Ante, means. It's a means. It is an instrument to gain participation, resources, opportunities, power, everything. Now here, when you look at these dimensions of ethnic conflicts, whenever you have a broad question, my dear, ethnic conflicts will fundamentally include communal conflicts. Ethnic conflicts will fundamentally include linguistic conflicts. Ethnic conflicts will fundamentally include the regional conflicts, the regionalism. Ethnic conflicts will also include the tribal conflicts. Ethnic conflicts will also include the tribal conflicts. That is the basic understanding that you can ever remember with respect to this particular aspect. Are you understanding? It could be communal, it could be linguistic, it could be regional, it could be tribal. Whenever they ask you the anthropology or the science behind ethnic conflicts, divide it. It's easy to write. And definitely use this primordial and instrumental approach. Any question on ethnicity, these two words should be there. Geet should be there, Frederick Barth should be there. Right? Geet should be there, Frederick Barth should be there at any cost whenever you're talking about this. Right? Then apart from that, you also need to understand an extension with respect to the tribal conflicts there. Now, whenever you talk about the tribal conflicts, the simple understanding is what? Tribal conflicts with respect to identity. Tribal conflicts with respect to secessionist. That means what? Separate statehood. Tribal conflicts with respect to the culture. Yes, tribal conflict with respect to the culture. Tribal conflicts with respect to the land rights. Tribal conflicts with respect to the land rights. Yes, and sometimes tribal conflicts with respect to the political aspects. Tribal conflicts with respect to the political aspects. Now here when we look at the identity, most of your northeastern conflicts are identity based. When we look at statehood, you have something like Gondraj. When you look at culture, it could be what? In the context of culture, it could be maybe Gond versus Lambadi. Or in the context of the culture, it could also be the Manipur conflict which is existing now. Because Manipur is what? It is an ethnic conflict and as well as it is a communal conflict. It is an ethnic conflict and a communal conflict. And when you look at the land rights, you can simply talk about the Naxal movements. The Naxal movements and the Naxal conflicts. Right, in the political aspect, you can talk about what? The Patalgadi movement. Patalgadi movement talking about what? Talking about the local self-governance systems. Where was this? This was in Jharkhand. Patalgadi movement where they were reinforcing their local systems and they were saying that we would never accept the modern political systems. Where they were saying that we would never accept the modern democratic systems. So, dividing like this is easy. I can write two points on each and examples. I can finish. Sometimes they are very specific with respect to northeastern region or central India. Doesn't matter. Reasons will remain same. Examples will change. We know ample amount of tribes existing in central India and we can write all their names and conflict, add that word. Northeastern we know. Conflict. Ekkado chodu jarigi untadi. Right? I always follow this, my dear, because I can't be very specific there in some questions there. Naadu asale delicate mind, naaku anni gurtundavu. Edaithe. So in that context, you will have to definitely do this jugaad. For example, 23 we had a collapsing of dam as disaster in GS3. Nobody expects that question. And that fellow asked, give examples. Where are we? India. Yes, in India, definitely one dam would have collapsed at least once. All that you need to know is, where are these dams? You write some 2 examples. Now, will the examiner be worried about this? No. That is what I always talk about, something called as normalization of content. Don't unnecessarily complicate. Normalize kar lo usko. Late average. Ho jayega. Because my target at the end of the day is what? Writing 440 well and 60 marks in anthropology, managing. Even if I write 420 good, 80 marks average, you're good to go with 270. So that should be your target here. Always remember this. Okay? Then some aspects of 6.2, 6.3, 7.1. Don't separate them. All of them are same. 6.2, 6.3 and 7.1. Now when you look at these dimensions with respect to 6.3, 6.2, 7.1, it is all about the tribal problems. Always ensure your introduction as the interaction of tribe, non-tribe has resulted in that XYZ problem. That's the core concept. The interaction of tribe, non-tribe has resulted in such phenomena, such issue, whatever be the issue. That should be the primary aspect. And the easiest part is what? In 6.2, if one concept is asked, all others will become the reasons and the impact of that particular phenomena. So, chumma by heart 6.2 chapter syllabus and go. If they are saying that poverty, reasons of poverty are there only, impact of poverty is also there only. Use those 5 points there, 5 points here, simple. Right? And you see 6.3 also becoming the reason for 6.2. What is 6.3? Development induced displacement. Aspects of urbanization, aspects of industrialization, aspects of globalization, all of these will definitely result in 6.2. And what are the measures? That is your 7.1. They say constitutional measures. Right? Whenever you are writing measures here, one aspect that you can talk about, I keep telling, is Ali structure. That means administrative, legislative, institutional. Administrative should include constitutional measures. Administrative should include constitutional measures is what is one aspect that you should remember. That should be mentioned here. That should be mentioned here. Then, apart from that, if you don't want to do this, whenever they ask you constitutional measures, Babu, don't keep writing from article 1, 2, 3, 4, no. Constitutional measures, divide them: social safeguards, political safeguards, economic safeguards, other safeguards. Social safeguards, political safeguards, economic safeguards and other safeguards. And automatically everything will fall in place. Right? Social safeguard should be what? DPSP. Social safeguard should be what? DPSP. Economic safeguard should be what? DPSP. And 244. 244 clause 1, 244 clause 2. Right? Your political safeguard should be with respect to what? 332 to 340. 332, 334, 335, 338. All of those are what? Political safeguards, reservation. You will also have to talk about 5th and 6th schedule as political safeguards. 6th schedule with respect to what? ADCs, autonomous district councils. Yes? Then talk about PESA, because that is an extension. Talk about those dimensions. Talk about Gram Sabha, those aspects. Then talk about other safeguards. Other safeguards are what? Whatever everybody else has. Fundamental rights. Other safeguards are fundamental rights. That could be simple understanding. So use that simple structure whenever you are writing with respect to the constitutional measures. Right? So that is another dimension. And whenever we are talking about this legislative, administrative, institutional, that is how you divide. Okay? Now, remember some policies always that are existing. One is Pradhan Mantri Van Dhan, then PM Ajay, right? Then PM Janman, then National PVTG Mission, PM Janman, then National PVTG Mission. That is another aspect. Then MSP for MFP. MSP for MFP. That is another. Right? Then you can talk about ITDA, MADA, cluster-based development. You can talk about LAMPS program. You can talk about TriFed. You can talk about MOTA, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. You can talk about MOTA, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. All these are some of the very common programs. Wherever you don't know anything, introduce this. FRA, Forest Rights Act is there. PESA is there. Prevention of atrocities. Common legislative measure which is seen to be existing. Prevention of atrocities, FRA, PESA, all those. Are you understanding this, right? So whenever they ask you some measures, do not break your head. Right? You can also use tribal subplan, TSP. You can use a tribal Panchashil. Tribal subplan, tribal Panchashil, these aspects that should be done. Then apart from this, sometimes we also see the question coming with respect to impact of modern democratic institutions. Now, whenever we see this impact of modern democratic institutions coming, always you see there are three probabilities. One, somebody has compromised. Somebody has a conflict and somebody has cooperated. Somebody has cooperated. That means in the compromise, what do you see? You see modern democratic institution dominating the traditional institution. Modern democratic institution dominating traditional institution. In the that means modern democratic becomes primary, traditional becomes secondary. In the conflict, what is happening? They prioritize the traditional institution over modern democratic institution. That means they would never give up. They would never give up. For example, Munda society. Mundas have rejected the funds of the local governments. That is there. Right? Now when you look at cooperation, that means what? If this is the administration, some of the administration is done by modern democratic institutions. Some of the administration is done by traditional institutions. Something which is related to social and economic and cultural that is done by modern, and something which is related to the political aspect that is done by modern democratic institution. For example, Gons. Gons have something called as a Rai Sabhas. Combination. So what do you observe here? Some societies accept, some societies deny, some societies have a compatibility which is seen to be existing. So technically, what can you remember with respect to this? The interplay of modern democratic institutions. Are you understanding this dimension, right? Whenever you are addressing this particular question, Right? If they are asking you what is the role of Panchayat Raj institutions, what is the role of modern democratic institutions, any of these you should be able to talk about this dimension. Because even today in Panchayat Raj institutions, be it the village system or the tribal system, we see these three tendencies exist. So that is another very, very important dimension that you need to remember with respect to this. Then sometimes we also see the impact of media. Sometimes we also see the impact of media. Now, whenever you would want to examine the impact of media, again, with respect to this impact of media, you talk about how is the digital technology promoting. Impact of media, how you would have also see the emergence of ethnic media coming into the picture. Emergence of ethnic media coming into the picture. That is also have an impact. How is the community radio changing? Changing the landscape. Changing the landscape. The whole structure and the function of a particular institution could be changed because of media. Whole of the structure and function of the respective institution could be changed because of media. If they are talking about impact of media on villages, agrarian relation, joint family, religion, tradition, judgment, same, ade. I'll send you a PDF. Right, I'll send you a PDF, you refer in that. Right? There are 3 case studies that I have dictated for this. You can happily get those things done. Okay? Right? That could also be used wherever you wish to use. Right? Even with respect to contemporary nature of field work. What is happening? Yesterday I told you media anthropologists are emerging. So in that also, if you wish to use, you can use those. Right? So that is one simple example that I can recollect as of now is Bultu radio. Right? Bultu radio with respect to Jharkhand. Right? That has revolutionized. And please do not forget how it has changed the role of women also. The status of women, the role of women will also have to be mentioned whenever you are writing these dimensions. Right? So this is another important aspect that you will have to remember. Then apart from this, moving to the last chapter, that is ninth chapter, there one is role of anthropology. Now whenever they are asking you role of anthropology in rural development and tribal development, what you can remember, one is define anthropology. Define anthropology, right? And talk about the speciality of anthropology. First class we discussed different methods. Then how is anthropology useful in policy making, policy implementation, policy evaluation? Policy making, policy implementation, policy evaluation. And conclude. Because if this is with respect to tribes, this is with respect to rural. Both. In tribes also we have policy making, implementation, evaluation. In rural areas also we have making, we have implementation and evaluation. That is a simple structure that you can follow whenever you are writing that answer. Now in the similar manner, they would also ask you role of NGOs. What can you do? Policy making, policy implementation, policy evaluation. One example for each. Policy making, policy implementation, policy evaluation, one example for role of NGOs. Now another dimension, wherever they are asking questions on regionalism. In regionalism, definitely bring in what? Bring in ethnicity. Definitely bring in what? Ethnic conflicts. Definitely bring in what? Ethnocentrism. Definitely bring in what? Whatever causes that we discussed for ethnic conflicts could be the cause for regionalism also. It could be what? It could be statehood, it could be culture, it could be language, it could be resources, it could be development. Development, resources, language, culture, statehood, all of these might result in ethnic conflict, which is nothing but regionalism. Which is nothing but regionalism.
As an person, it is natural of that is some that
No. You can simply say ethnocentric understanding of a particular region, leading to extreme forms of ethnic identity or extreme forms of ethnicity, resulting in what? This. Or I can simply say cultural attachments with an ethnocentric perspective results in what? Regionalism. Attachment to what? A particular region. You have scholars, if you want, you can use V.K. Srivastava. What has he told? Regionalism. Neistam.
Yeah.
Or if you want, you can use M.N. Srinivas suggesting solutions for regionalism. V.K. Srivastava use it for causes of regionalism.
You might be also.
Yemena cause? GS cause. But who has given? V.K. Srivastava. Now already I see instrumental approach by Frederick Barth, one thinker. Ethnocentric, one anthropology concept. Ethnic conflict, M.N. Srinivas, V.K. Srivastava. 5 thinkers are there. Now don't you think the regional conflict could also be existing on the basis of tribal aspects also?
Yeah.
Yes. Now in that context, discuss about Heimendorf and the study of Gond, the demand of Gondraj. Heimendorf and study of Gondraj. Heimendorf and study of Nagas. Greater Nagalim we say, no? Simple. So we have 3-4 thinkers which we can happily manage. And structuring is more important here. Right? Same thing with respect to communalism. What's happening in communalism? Ethnocentric approach. Of what? Religion. Religion. Ethnocentric approach of religion. 1. Ethnic conflict. On the basis of what? Religion. Tribal conflicts on the basis of religion. Cultural intrusions. Reasons you talk about. You talk about reasons. Same reasons as what we have. Cultural appropriation, cultural intrusions, cultural subjugation, transculturation. All these are what? All these are could be the reasons for communalism and suggestions for communalism. Are you understanding this, right? So that is the simplest approach that you can follow for 9th chapter. Now one small thing, whenever they are asking you tribal development, last. Whenever we have tribal development, one aspect we see is what happened pre-independence, independence, post-independence. This is one approach with respect to tribal development. And within this post-independence only, we can talk about 3 kinds of approaches. What is that? Isolation approach, assimilation approach, integration approach. Isolation approach talk about whom? Verrier Elwin. Verrier Elwin. Assimilation approach talk about G.S. Gure and Thakkar Bappa. Thakkar Bappa and G.S. Gure. In integration approach, again Verrier Elwin, Jawaharlal Nehru. You can talk about L.P. Vidyarthi. L.P. Vidyarthi says, if you have to integrate at the national level, first integrate at regional level. Let that community be integrated at the regional level, then we can think about integration at national level. And that is where he talks about what? Mainstreaming of the tribal societies at the region, then later on national level. So that is L.P. Vidyarthi.
He said, benefits of technological advancement is provided to the tribal, but concepts you can't be.
Majumdar talks about the systems behind communication there. So there he talks about the utility of technology. Let it be provided, but don't intrude too much. Right? So that is one aspect. And another thing that you will have to remember is this is what is resulting in tribal Panchashil. That is what is resulting in tribal Panchashil. See, one conclusion is tribal Panchashil. One conclusion is integrationist approach. One conclusion is changing from tribal development to tribe-led development. That could be another conclusion. Right? One conclusion could be some recent policy. One conclusion could be draft national tribe policy. Play with these only. Draft national tribal policy. Right? This could be some conclusions. One question. Ho jayega. You can manage. Is this clear?
What's the last bit?
I'm telling you, draft national tribal policy. Recent policies. Right? So with this, we finish paper 2. It's easy if you observe.
So, yes.
1.5 hours we finished whole paper 2. Which technically means 10 days you will finish whole paper 2. For people who are writing means 5 days you will finish paper 2. Now, right? So nothing to worry. You please take the recording. Online people, those who have missed the initial half an hour, please take recording. Right? So that is it from my side. And I think I have sent handouts to people who are writing mains this year. Yes. If anybody did not receive any of my handouts, please, this is my contact number. You can message, but whenever you are messaging, please write your name and what class you are part of. Okay, I will not anticipate, okay, that you are, and I can visualize that will not happen. So you please message your name. You might say privacy is important to you. Privacy is more important to me. Right? Especially in the recent past, at least last 4 months, privacy is very important to me. Right? So you please send your dimension with respect to these numbers and I would send you the handout. Okay. So that is it from my side, and all the best those are writing mains, and those are writing mains next year. Sadukondi first. That's the only suggestion that I would give you. Okay. We'll meet. Thank you.